Pilots are a crucial aspect of modern travel. Without pilots, international travel could take weeks or even months if you had to cross a major ocean by boat. In the history of airplanes, the first flight was on December 17, 1903. This flight was made by the Wright brothers, and it was in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The first air service, however, did not begin until January 1st, 1914, and this air service could only carry one passenger at a time and generally charged fees of up to $5 per passenger per flight. The first modern airliner would not come along until mid-1933, and shortly after, passenger airlines like we know today would actually follow. My main talking points in this presentation will include the requirements and education of being a pilot, the duties and responsibilities in the career of a pilot, the salary and benefits that a pilot can expect, and the occupational outlook of this profession. The requirements in education include many different licenses that a pilot must acquire to actually fly passengers in flight. The first of these is their private pilot's license, which will require the person to be 16 years of age, have at least a minimum of 40 hours of flight, and take a written and medical exam. However, even though it only requires 40 hours of flight, generally it will take a pilot at least 50 or 60 hours to acquire their private pilot license. The next step is obtaining one's commercial pilot license. The other requirement on top of the private pilot license that this requires to obtain is 250 more hours of flight, which is generally done in a jet engine plane. After this, one will try and obtain their airline transport pilot license. This requires 1,500 additional hours of flight, as well as the applicant be at least 23 years old. To become a pilot at a major airline or even a regional airline, they will generally require that the pilot also have a bachelor's degree. However, the major of this degree normally does not matter to the airline simply because the skills that they'll be using as a pilot are all learned in their flight classes and the classes they take for their pilot's license rather than their undergraduate degree. The responsibilities of a pilot include communicating effectively and quickly as a team. This is to ensure that when mid-flight changes and or problems arise, that the aircraft crew can communicate effectively and quickly to minimize the time that there is for an error to actually occur. Another responsibility of a pilot is to make sure to plan carefully. This includes checking the safety of an aircraft, the weather conditions, and that the cargo is loaded correctly, because unlike a car, a bus, or a train, if a problem arises mid-transport on a plane, you can't exactly just stop and pull over and readjust things and then go back on your way again. Another responsibility of a pilot is actually to be prepared to be called in on reserve. What reserve duty is it is actually generally new pilots will be put on reserve duty during some of their off days. This requires that they be on alert in case a captain or co-pilot of an aircraft has to call in sick or has a family emergency, so that they can make it to the airport in a minimum of 2 hours to be ready to go and take off that plane and be in flight. Generally, they'll work several days in a row on reserve, and then they'll have a few days off before going back on reserve. The last responsibility of a pilot is to communicate well with passengers. This includes both being personable on takeoff, and it also includes minimizing panic and bad weather or aircraft failure if that shall occur. However, most of the time they communicate over some sort of PA system or intercom. This allows the personable aspect of them being able to hear the pilot's voice, but also maintains the security of the cockpit. Some of the duties of a pilot include checking the condition of the aircraft. This is just to make sure that the aircraft is safe for flight, because once again, unlike a car, if you get a flat tire on a car, you can pull over and call a tow truck. If a wing falls off an airplane, you're not in the same situation. Their next duty is to ensure that the aircraft is balanced and below weight limit, and also to ensure adequate fuel and weather conditions. This is just to make sure that they can always make sure that they'll make safe passage to their destination. The fourth responsibility of a pilot is to submit flight plans to air traffic controls, and then they also have to communicate with air traffic controls and operate aircraft along planned routes and during takeoffs and landings among the planned times. This is to ensure that no two planes collide and also to decrease the congestion of airspace around airports. Their last responsibility is to monitor engine, fuel, and other systems during flight, and also to navigate the aircraft by instruments and visual references. They need to monitor all the systems as well as the engine and fuel consumption to make sure that the plane is still in a safe condition to continue flight, and to make sure that they don't have to land early at an airport along their route. They also need to be able to navigate by more than instruments, just so that in case the instruments fail, they can still make it to their destination without suffering adverse consequences or compromising the safety of the passengers. They also need to be able to navigate by instruments in case they suffer from conditions of reduced visibility. The salary of pilots will generally start at around $21,600 per year at a smaller regional airline, and a starting pilot at a major airline can expect $36,000 minimum and upwards of generally around $50,000. Most captains mid-career average about $150,000 to $165,000, and the highest paid international pilots that fly large planes such as the 747 and the Superbus make around $300,000 a year. You also have to remember that while these numbers may seem very low for starting pilots, most pilots only fly around 72 hours a month simply because they're limited to 150 hours a month by the Federal Aircraft Administration, but they actually fly much less simply because airlines don't want to risk having an overstressed pilot piloting an aircraft. Most commercial pilots can average anywhere from $50,000 to $90,000 a year, ranging throughout their career, but the average generally falls around $73,000. Some of the benefits of being a pilot are, once again, you're limited to 150 flying hours a month. Generally, once again, this is much lower of about 72 hours a month, so you work relatively little hours a month actually in the cockpit of an aircraft. You also have a very flexible schedule when you're not flying. This is simply because most of your work is preparing the aircraft and scheduling flights or doing paperwork, so it's relatively flexible work in regards to when it can get done. They also get a large discount on flights, both internationally and domestically, and this is generally for life for them and their family, so even once they retire, they generally will still retain that discount. They also receive a free enrollment in a 401k program that also includes matching donations by the airline up to a certain percentage of their annual income, and most airlines will match their charitable donations. They also generally receive comprehensive medical coverage for both the pilot and their family, and they do not have to buy work clothes simply due to the fact that the airline provides uniforms for captains and co-pilots most of the time free of charge. Also, while they are in flight, when they land and are on a layover before flying a plane back to their home airport, they're reimbursed for all their living expenses while they are away from home, which generally includes their hotel and eating expenses. The career outlook for pilots is pretty positive. They're expecting 4 to 5% annual growth over the next 20 years for airline pilots, and Boeing is predicting about a 9% annual growth for commercial pilots. Internationally, they're expecting almost 500,000 new pilots over the next 20 years. Many of these will be in the Asia-Pacific region of the world. In conclusion, both airline and commercial pilots are generally offered high salaries after the first couple years and will experience decent job growth over the next 20 years. They also receive very good benefits from both their airline and as well as their other companies that they can work for. And they have an interesting job that allows them to see the world and other cultures that they might not have ever gotten the chance to see.